West Ham United, a football club in crisis. And the situation surrounding the club is chaotic at the moment. The fans are angry at the management and owners about several things. Recently, a fan ran onto the pitch and planted a corner flag in the centre circle, and there's been other scuffles too. Fans are angry about the way the club's been run, and many are furious, sad and disillusioned that the club has moved to a new stadium, the London Stadium, the former Olympic Stadium from 2012 that's been modified. It's in Stratford, a bit away from the roots of West Ham. It's surrounded by a mayhem of glass facades with one of the biggest shopping centres in Europe. So West Ham has moved from the old school working class neighbourhood to this inferno, hell perhaps even, of glass, metal and shopping. Until recently, West Ham played at the legendary Boleyn Ground in Upton Park, but now they've gone away from these roots. I've now met with Mark Walker and Paul Turner, both active in West Ham United Independent Supporters Federation, and they want more fan influence in the club. With this, I welcome you to Genpres, a weekly Danish podcast about football, sponsored by NordicBet. Most of the podcasts are in Danish, but sometimes I do an all-English version. This is one of them. There's a handful of English ones on the website already. Go onto the site and find the ones titled only in English, and with the addition UK version. Go on to www.nordicbet.dk and press blog, and you'll find the podcast in there. You can also find the podcast in your podcast app under GENPRES. We're on Spotify too. I'm your host, Tom Carstensen, and welcome to the program. You guys want more power to the people, so to speak, to the fans in West Ham, is that correct?
We think that the supporters are always the kind of biggest stakeholder within the club, so it's important that supporters have more of a say. I think one of our main aims as an association would be to have a supporter on the board.
Yeah, there's also other examples as well of the Stadium Safety Advisory Group that meets every couple of months, or in some cases recently there's been emergency meetings with regards to egress from the stadium and actually people leaving the area, as well as the incidents that took place on the 10th of March at the Burnley game. So we as the Independent Support Association are trying to get a fan participation within the Safety Advisory Group itself, which actually is the public bodies, the police, the stadium, the local council, and other stakeholders as well, like LU, to try and actually get some sort of input. Because there was an example of from the Burnley game reports on the BBC website about how there were apparently an organised WhatsApp group, or people that were organising coming together within the stadium to cause disorder, or whichever reporting they reported at the time, when actually anyone that knows anything, you can't get any signal in that stadium. So so if that was ever come up at the Safety Advisory Group meeting, which in the minutes is not reported, which came out a month or so later, then at least there's someone there that can challenge that notion. Yeah. Because the BBC report seemed to make it look like it was an absolute rather than a questionable, and it's incredibly questionable when as soon as someone reads it and thinks, I can't get any signal anyway. And these other things, like some people apparently planned for disorder outside certain turnstiles to allow other people to break into the stadium. That's not in the meeting minutes either, so it just seems like a load of hogwash, to put it politely.
Brand new stadium, no Wi-Fi.
That's a commercial thing. That's one of the things that the club are suing the taxpayer and suing anyone who has a stake in that stadium in their big court case in November of this year, or 2018.
Let's talk about the current situation. You mentioned the Burnley game before. Several fans were on the pitch. One was taken out by one of the players, I seem to remember. Another one ran in with a corner flag. Well, why are West Ham fans so angry?
I think there's been a catalogue of we get told off for saying lies, don't we? But falsehoods, are we allowed to say that?
What's the difference?
Half-truths.
Okay.
To understand the problem, what you've got to try and understand is that the stadium was built up to such a point where it was beyond the ability to actually be delivered what was promised. And I think where the tension has come about is the club would never be able to deliver upon what they promised, and they were so desperate to get us out of Upton Park and so desperate to get us into that Olympic Stadium, that they never really thought about how it was actually going to work. It feels like they just promised the world, and then I think people bought into it. They believed that, okay, football's moving forward, and they looked around and they knew that it was on the agenda that Tottenham were going to get a new stadium and Chelsea were going to get a new stadium, and that if we were going to compete, that we had to move. And lots of us were very cynical, but the majority of supporters, I'd have to say, were pro going to the stadium.
Was that how it was? What about you guys? Were you pro or con?
I mean, personally, I was very, very much against. I can't
as part of the survey that the flawed survey, I have to say, in my opinion, that the club produced before the move, there were 5 questions. Well, there was one question at the end. There was 5 options, and it was, do you support the move to the stadium? And 4 of them were yes, or yeses, and the 5th one was no under any circumstance. And the other ones were yes, I trust the board. Yes, I want better players. Yes, I want basically popcorn and rainbows.
Wasn't one of them like, we trust the board to deliver this? Or
yeah, one of them.
Awful,
yeah. So what they did, the club at the end said 85. I think it was 85 or 86%. They bundled all those yes answers together and said, perfect, there's a majority of support for the stadium move. The option that I selected on that question was, I would only support the move if I had more information. And the club at the time intended to either provide more literature, another sit-down meeting where you probably had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, or actually take a tour of the stadium as it was at the time, in wearing like your high-vis PPE and all that. They never contacted me or anyone else that responded that way in that question. So I never actually voted 100% yes to that. I'm minded to it. I just want more information.
There's a couple of interesting points there as well. Firstly, on the point of the survey, there was never going to be a survey. A group of us campaigned for a question, and all we wanted, and we got huge support for this, was just a simple yes, no. Given the information you've been given now, do you want to move to the stadium, yes or no? And what the club did was they wouldn't give us that, but they did this kind of fudged survey. The second thing about throughout, I mean, the lies, forget it, we'll call them that started throughout this process, because during the transition,
There was a banner where it said lying, thieving, frauds.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't massively disassociate myself with those comments, but the issue with the process was that about a year before we moved in, the stadium was configured as how it would be for us for the Rugby World Cup. So at that point, the club could have said, come over, have a look at the stadium, have a look roughly where your seats are going to be, because that was a promise that we were going to take you round there, etc., etc. Never materialised, because they knew as soon as people went in there and saw it, they would say no thank you.
Yep. And to go back to the question I was asked about why West Ham fans are upset, part of it as well, and it goes to Mark's answer, is people are giving it a couple of years, or they're giving it a couple of seasons, and you look at West Ham in the table. West Ham's never been about the glory. If it was, then you support someone else. And it's never been about the trophies, because we don't win anything unless it's the Intertoto Egg Cup or whatever.
Betway Cup.
The Betway Cup, which we usually lose as well, the pre-season friendly. But there's a number of things that people can see, and they see the table, and the table doesn't lie. You're only as good as you are in the league and the amount of points you get at the end of the season. And West Ham moving to this stadium, people realise you could have stayed at the Boleyn Ground, and we're pretty much the same as 11 other teams in the league. You have some rubbish results, you go down. You have some half-decent results, and you basically end up in the same wedge of points between 30 and 40 as it stands in the league at the moment. We could have easily have done what Watford had done and got a couple more wins and be higher up in the league. We could have got a couple more losses, and we could be 1 point off relegation or 1 point underneath Southampton. So it doesn't. So a lot of people have seen the move, and they don't actually see what the tangible result coming out of the move, or how that's actually benefited the club, where we pretty much are in the same circumstance we've always been if we're ever in the top flight.
What's the atmosphere like in the new ground?
It can be good. It can be good, but what I think people misunderstand about atmosphere is that Upton Park, even at the end, and some people are critical about this, but even at the end, could become a very difficult place to come and play football, especially under the lights. And teams came down that were doing well would struggle because it was not a comfortable place to play football. And I think when we talk about atmosphere and the transition of atmosphere not going across, you can have 60,000 people, or 45,000 people singing Bubbles, and it sounds great, but actually the players are so far away from the pitch when you're not on top of the players like you once were. So the teams at the top of the table that want to play football feel comfortable there. I mean, we've been annihilated by pretty much all the teams in the top of the division over the 2 seasons we've been there, because teams aren't intimidated to play. The fans are miles away from the pitch. They're not getting like sworn at every time they go and take a throw in. Do you know what I mean? So because the fans are so far away. So yeah, there's been a couple of examples. Tottenham last year, Leicester this year, where the ground has sung in unison and it sounded really good. But actually, to achieve the points you need to achieve, because Upton Park probably worth 8 points a year in terms of like just pure intimidation, teams not wanting to play there. You just can't replicate that there. It'll be impossible.
Yeah, a personal experience of where I am in the stadium. I'm in the Bognor Lower on the scaffold. I go across the scaffold bridge on the scaffold. I look over to my left. I can see the 200-metre start line for the 8th Flame. I can look over on the for the 200 metres, the start line, the 8th Flame out of 9. And if I look over on the diagonal, on my right, I can see the section of home fans that would actually be on the left-hand side of your way. So it's block 114, 115 in the West Lower. I can see them clapping. I can see them maybe chanting or jumping up and down or trying to start something over their end, but the noise doesn't carry over. In that stadium, it kind of carries over as a Mexican wave of sound where you can hear a chant coming and it comes round and then it echoes and comes round the stadium, rather than where I was in the Bognor Lower at the Boleyn Ground. I could clearly hear everything that was coming out of the East Stand, out of Chav Corner, out of the West Stand, and then as a chant it can actually be louder and it can be as one. But this, it seems like a Mexican wave where it builds up and then it passes you by and it goes on as a wave around the stadium. That's just my personal experience in terms of the atmosphere in the crowd, because it's a bowl and because it's so disconnected from your own set of fans that are across the way from you. You can't really tell what they're doing, so you can't join in, you can't make that effort. So you basically have to try and start your own thing and see if that goes around the stadium.
I spoke to one of the Palace owners recently, Stephen Broward, where he was, you just called it a bowl, a stadium. He's making a big difference between a ground and a stadium, where he said he would never see Palace move away. They might build a new stand, but he wants like the old ground where you're more close to the pitch. And is that the problem here, basically? That it's like, yeah, disconnected.
Part of it as well, and also you have Everton, who are currently doing a fan survey, or at least they're doing a consultation with their fans about their proposed new stadium, and they're using they're using the Olympic Stadium as an example of how not to do it. They are actively doing that in their slides, in their 3D renders, in their presentation, in their literature. They're clearly advertising this will be the sight line or the distance for Everton fans at our intended stadium. This is what it is at the London Stadium. This is not what we're going to do. So within 2 years, we've already been using an example of how not to do it.
I mean, we heard a lot about sight lines and stuff when we were moving, and I'm not sure everyone really understands it. And Brady had great fun in saying, no seats are going to be further away than Wembley and stuff like that. But you go to Wembley once a year.
That's the one-off, the special, the final.
You don't want to go every week. Do you know what I mean? You want to go to the pub and you want to wander into the ground. That's the difference. And that's a lot of the tension comes from that. So, because it's an iconic stadium, the security to get in is ridiculous. Like, it's a proper search, like you would expect if you were going on holiday. And the problem you've got is that all that adds to bad feeling and bad tension. So where she used to come out of the Queen's and walk down Green Street and walk into the ground 10 minutes later, here you've got to leave the pub at 2 to get into the ground at 3:05 because the amount of security to get through is almost impossible. So all of this kind of adds to the kind of experience. And the problem is people do it one-off. So like when Saracens went and played there, people will arrive early and go in because they're going to the Olympic Stadium, and
they might not necessarily have their routines of the particular pubs they go to, like the football fans.
Yeah, but when you're playing Accrington Stanley on a Tuesday night in the League Cup, you want to be in and out as quickly as possible. Do you know what I mean? So,
does it still feel like the real West Ham after moving?
Away games do, definitely. And I think that's a lot. I mean, personally, I think of my home season ticket as being a tax on my away games. It's a £600 tax on being able to go to away games. So
I feel very similar about that, because I'm umming and ahhing again this year about renewing my season ticket purely for the fact to preserve my away points.
Yeah.
So I can actually attend the away games off my own back and go to the games that I want to go to, because I've got enough points that I've accrued for the games that I've been to that I can do that, rather than having to rely on buying second hand or someone else. So
do you not go as often to the home games as you used to?
I don't know, but
because
killed.
of this?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel as important almost to home games as it once did. It didn't feel like you were. Do you know what I mean? You don't have that same community and camaraderie and stuff like that. But away games, it kills me to miss an away game. Kills me missing an away game.
Yeah, for home games at the Boleyn, there was 7 of us who had season tickets as a group. Friends, relatives would all go. And if someone couldn't go, it was always a price of a pint in the programme to get someone else to take the ticket. Happy days, they go. Now at the stadium, there's 6 of us instead of the 7. We can't give the tickets away if someone can't go. There was someone who was just one of my friends who was away on holiday in the Dominican Republic for the Stoke game. Couldn't give his ticket away, and we had months' notice because
no one wanted it.
No one wants them. But I'd echo what Mark says: away games every single time.
I remember Cass Pennant, former West Ham hooligan, wrote something recently where he I think he called it felt like London United now after the move. Do you understand the notion?
I think there's a difference between watching and belonging. I think when at Upton Park, I felt like I belonged to part of West Ham United Football Club, and now I feel that I'm just there to experience a game of football. And I think that's what makes supporting West Ham unique. What makes clubs, dare I say, like West Ham unique, is that ability to feel that you're part of it, that you're part of a community, that you're part of a club, and that's what keeps you coming back time and time again. It's not results, it's not success, as Paul said. You're not a glory supporters team, but you don't mind going back week in after 8. You don't mind travelling to Swansea in the snow or Sunderland on a Tuesday night because you felt part of something that was unique and special. But now, especially at home, just feel like you're there to be part of an experience.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's completely and utterly down to the London Stadium, Olympic Stadium itself, or if it's just people nowadays looking after themselves. There's an example of there was a lad who unfortunately fell down a small flight of stairs, and he, I believe it was, broke his ankle or dislocated his ankle. Yeah, so he caused himself a real serious mischief, and he's obviously in a lot of pain. In that stadium, a lot of people just step over him to leave or go about their own way, rather than actually looking after his child, or at least trying to see, are you okay, or getting attention, medical help, whatever. So there does seem to be, where I am in the stadium, when I'm there at the game, there's a good enough crowd of people that we try and get chants going, or we're at least a bit of gallows humour like it was at the Boleyn Ground. But in other places, when I'm walking around the outside of the stadium, or I'm walking to the stadium itself, to me it just doesn't feel like the West Ham that I grew up with or was absolutely forced to support, because I had absolutely no choice in the matter. So
who forced you?
Parents, grandparents. I basically would have been, the door would have been open, I would have told there's wolves out there, go, let them raise you. Then there's no other option. It was never a chance of selecting anything else. So as I say, I don't know if that's just a societal thing in general, or if it is actually a new breed of fan at the stadium, but that's also a bit snobbish of me to say, because who am I to judge anyone else that actually maybe not been able to afford going to West Ham before, maybe not had the chance to with a high capacity, now has more of an option to go.
Is it actually cheaper now?
Some of the tickets, well, they say the £289 tickets as long as you buy for 2 years, so you're locked in for 2 years, but they're up in the gods, what they call band 5. Where I am is roughly £600. It's band 3. Band 4 is a little bit cheaper.
Still not too bad for Premier League, is it?
It's not, but then on the flip side, there's what they call the Category A games, so it'll be the Man Uniteds, the Man Cities, Tottenhams, Chelsea, where there's no concessions in the stadium, so children tickets start at £80.
And also
£80 for kids?
Yeah, no concession.
Jeez.
And that's, well, actually, to be fair, I'm going to correct myself there, because someone's probably going to think, actually, no, he's talking out of his arse there. It's £80 for a child ticket in what they call the 1966 seats in the middle of the East Stand, which is the best views, as they call it, on the halfway line. OAP and children tickets start at £80 in that area. I think it's £50 actually, thinking about it now in my mind. I think it starts at £50 for a child for those particular games. So on the one hand,
I wouldn't call £50 a bargain either.
Neither would I. They say on one hand it's affordable family football for all, which is basically they're trying to pump out cheap tickets for when it's Accrington Stanley, if it's Bolton at home in the League Cup. On the other hand, you want to see West Ham play Man United at Tottenham, here's £50 minimum for your children.
But that's if you go. Yeah, what they wanted to do is sell season tickets, so they knocked out kids' season tickets for £99. But then what people did, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, is I bought season tickets for both my sons, knowing they wouldn't go to every game, but when they did want to go, it would be cheaper than if I tried to buy a £50 ticket. So what happens then is you've got this kind of bizarre situation in the stadium that's sold out. Actually, you've got between 5,000 and 10,000 empty seats because they're kids' tickets. They can't.
That's like Arsenal. Then.
Yeah, and they do things, don't they? They'll say like, "Oh, you can upgrade them just for a tenner or something like that." And
yeah, they did it for the Stoke game.
Yeah, and this is the thing. And anyone raises this as an issue, and they'll say, "Well, no, because we've got 50,000 people on a waiting list for season tickets."
They keep saying as well, we've got X amount of families that turn up.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they're doing a head count or if how they actually work that one out on a game-by-game basis.
Well, some clubs basically, if the ticket is sold, if the season ticket is sold, I think they just class it as someone there, even though they might not be.
Yeah.
What the old ground? What was so special about that? What did it have?
To me, it felt like home. It felt like home away from home.
History and home, they're the two things.
They're the main things that come out of me because obviously it's been answers to other questions. We've never been about actually winning games most of the time. Whenever I used to get asked on a day before when I'm at work or whatever, it's, "Oh, Paul, how do you think the game's going to go?" I always say, "I think we're going to lose." And then when I come into work, they go, "Oh, you're such a miserable git." It's like, yeah, I know, because I've seen us lose so many times. But to me, that ground just felt like home away from home. It was something that was a constant. It was always there. Well, now obviously it's not, unfortunately, but it always felt like it was something there. You could always come back to it. I'd always pass by on the tube or in a car or on a bus or whatever. The ground would be there, and it's something that I could visit on a non-match day, and it's something that I could actually touch and feel. You can touch the Olympic Stadium if you really wanted to, but it doesn't. If you really were that enamoured with it, but it doesn't feel like there's that kind of connection where you've got a history and a belonging and a want to be there as well.
No, I remember I spoke to Amanda she said if she didn't get to go, it didn't hurt her like it used to.
Exactly, yeah. I agree with all the points that Paul's made. I think that there's always that personal aspect to that place as well. I stood there with my granddad, and then I stood there with my son. So in life, things change all the time. All our lives evolve and change, and to have that constant in your life is a really special thing. And I suppose arguably any club that doesn't leave, you retain that. So for a lot of us, it was hard to give that up because it was a link to our past, and it was a constant. But it was just a very special place, and you like the place smelt of the history of the club. Do you know what I mean? Because you kind of knew the generations that had come before, and even though like the stands had evolved, it always felt like it always felt the same, didn't it? It never lost that sense of like closeness and community. And
well, what about the surrounding area out there? That had a lot of soul as well, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that
I wouldn't call it pretty, but...
and a lot of promises were made to those guys at the beginning about, don't worry, we're going to take everyone with you. They promised the supporters club their move. They spoke to the Nathan's Pie and Mash, and all these companies have said, don't worry, there'll be a place for you there as well. You'll come with us.
Even the independent street traders who've been on a match day selling either sweets or merchandise or old programs, that kind of thing as well.
And when the Moore Stevens report came out in December, it was clear that even at that point the club knew that wasn't going to be the case, yet they'd continued to say that it was.
So
do you know what I mean?
It's cost a lot of local people their livelihood, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of supporters go out their way to visit there before match day. Some people go to East Ham Working Men's Club and will go to Nathan's for pie mash, then travel over to Stratford. But, I mean...
over time, that might die out because the East Ham Man's Working Club, they've sold the building to a developer. They're going to retain part of who they are in a ground unit, but the rest of the building's going to be like a flat complex. There's going to be all the development in the area. A lot of the businesses, they're not exactly gone to the wall just yet, but they are obviously struggling for the revenue which has been lost for the club not being there. So,
and when the new flats go in, the gentrification of the area will go through the roof, and the demand for the pie and mash shop to make way for a Pret a Manger or something will go through the roof.
No, but wouldn't the pie and mash shop be considered vintage, or at least
I don't know,
or something?
You're more hipster than me, Paul. I don't know, but
I'll be a bit no.
And the new stadium where that is near Westfield and
Westfield don't want us there. That's just my opinion.
No, but I just mean the area is all glass and concrete buildings. And
no, yeah, and the more cynical amongst us will say that if you look at the designs on the area around the stadium, there's a lot of residential going in. There's a university complex about to go in. So the cynical amongst you would say, well, actually, the club have just got to sit on it for a few more years, and there's going to be a whole new fan base brought in on their doorstep that are going to be more enamoured with the place and less kind of worried about us paying like homage to our past all the time.
Yeah, because it might be a case of the advertisement will be come see Premier League football. It doesn't. You don't even have to probably mention the teams. Like Premier League football live stadium this day. There you go.
Yeah.
It's not even a case of West Ham paying someone.
They came unstuck Upton Park once because they had an advert saying "Come and see City superstars," didn't they?
Absolutely
I've never seen anything backfire so much in my life.
Yeah, they backpedaled on that badly.
Yeah.
Even the advert they pulled up on the Stoke game, they said Hammers versus City, and it was a sky blue like it was Coventry, and we were like, so we're playing Coventry then? Or it's like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that particular area, there's going to be a lot of redevelopment within the next few years. There's a lot of planning permission going in for residential as well as, Mark says, university, the V&A, Sanders Wells, theatre, all those sorts of things. So there's going to be a lot of hassle for West Ham fans trying to get into that stadium going forward for probably in the next 5 to 10 years.
We're just going to take a short water break, and we'll be back with more Genpres, presented by NordicBet in a moment. Welcome back to Genpres. This week I'm doing a special on West Ham United and the trouble the club's gone through. I'm talking to Paul Turner and Mark Walker of West Ham United's Independent Supporters Association. Would you move back in a heartbeat if you had the opportunity and if they hadn't moved to just demolish the old ground?
Yes.
Yeah, no question. I'd move to a purpose-built football stadium anywhere in kind of the East London, Essex area now.
Essex. That's
well, I mean, anywhere that was still rooted where our fan base was, I would go. Do you know what I mean?
Stratford is not.
Stratford is, but it's not a purpose-built stadium. So if someone could build a purpose-built stadium in Stratford, then yeah, I'd move there. But I think that I think we need a football ground. We don't need a stadium.
So is that the solution? A whole new stadium ground?
I don't think that would be a complete drastic opinion. Would you?
Well, I think a lot of people would want to see West Ham play their home games in a purpose-built football stadium, because a fair bit of the opinion that's out there at the moment is along the lines of, we are where we are, let's make the most of it, rather, because if the option came about of actually there is something else that could happen, this is a lot of for lack of a better phrase, it's pie in the sky talking at the moment. So
is there an alternative? I mean, look at prices for property in London. I mean,
I think zones 1 to 4 you're going to struggle, aren't you? I think once you get out of
the former ownership before David Gold came to West Ham under the Icelandic ownership, there was designs on a plot of land which was the old Parcel Force site next to West Ham Station itself, where at the time there's gas pipes and canisters and all sorts of gasworks in the area, which was usually an excuse not to be able to build or get plan permission. Berkeley Homes are currently going to be building, I think it's called Stevenson Street. I might have pronounced it wrong if I read the advertisement wrong, but they've got plan permission. They're going to build thousands upon thousands of homes, schools, all this like on that particular plot of land, which goes to show where there was a will, there's a way it could have been done.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the debate now within, I think, from the majority of supporters is how do we make that stadium more like a home, and people say, I mean, you can't dig down. That's the first thing you understand. If you're going to have like a more traditional, conventional football stadium, you need to dig down and lower the pitch and have like a proper gap to the down to the pitch, like they did at the Etihad. They designed that really well. You can't do that because of the land's being capped.
And toxic waste is underneath it.
And so you have to knock it down and build again. There's talk about moving the seats nearer the pitch. The Green Book on British Football Stadium kind of advises against that. It says that we suggest that seats are covered. The reason the seats can't go any further forward is because of the roof. The roof only goes so far, and a lot of supporters get confused by this idea of retractable seating. They go, if we have a retractable seat, it will go nearer the pitch. It wouldn't. The retractable seating means we wouldn't have to play our first 4 games of the season away from home while they reconstructed the seats again. So,
the roof, I mean, I've been to football games and got rained on.
Yeah.
I didn't die.
Yeah, I don't mind.
But the problem, and yeah, of course, fine, and everyone's fine with that. But if you look at the makeup of the stadium, if you move the seats right up to the pitch, all you're doing is creating a much bigger void between the lower tier and the upper tier. And it's always, if you sit anywhere bar the east stand, if you're in the upper tier, you're looking over a massive trampoline
and scaffold as well.
And scaffolding, and it distorts the eye, I think. But I mean, so I think yeah, let's move the seats right up close to the pitch, and that's great for the 15,000 people that are in there. But the 40,000 people that are in the upper tier, they're not going anywhere. They're still closer to Orient.
Yep, exactly. And part of the actual build of the stadium originally for the Olympics, there was a lot of temporary train sidings and the like that were put in to actually take waste away, and also the canals were utilised as well. With a lot of the development that's now gone on there, and obviously the refit out the stadium to make it is what it is at the moment, you'd have to probably put a lot more trucks on the road, which is very unpalatable to Newham. If you ever read their meeting minutes from any of their meetings with regards to planning permission. Also, because it's on the boundaries with Tower Hamlets and Hackney, they also have a stake in if there's any redevelopment on the Olympic Park site itself. They're also against any extra lorry movements in the area. So any sort of major redesign or redevelopment which needs a constructural configuration is pretty much a no-go as it stands at the moment, especially considering as well the new buildings that are going to go in very soon.
So overall, how much of West Ham's soul has been lost in this move?
I told myself when we left Upton Park that I have to think about West Ham United ending and this being a new thing, because otherwise you run the risk of spending your whole life being miserable because it's not as good as what you left behind. But I think that's turned out to be almost impossible because it's so different. It feels so different, and the away games, as we've mentioned, is such a reminder of what we've had.
That's the soul, in theory.
Yeah, the soul of the club has always been the support, and by moving us to Riyadh and adding 20,000 new people, that's not to say the new thing won't eventually evolve into being something really good, but at the moment, I think that the soul feels lost. And whether it can be found again, I'm not sure, but it certainly feels like it's been lost.
So realistically, I mean, Arsenal has like 60,000 now. Tottenham and Chelsea are getting similar attendance. Was 66 at your ground now or something?
No, that's the ambition.
Officially at the moment, 57,000.
But Boleyn had 35,000. But you would need a bigger stadium than the old one to compete with, yeah?
Planning permission was in to redevelop the East Stand, and it had been approved, and it's still on the Newham Council website, and planning permission elapses over a period of time. So on the Newham Council planning permission website, the renders, the drawings, the reports that they came up with for redeveloping the East Stand to closing the corners with what were the North and the South Bank, which was the Sir Trevor and the Bodmore stand. That's on the website. It was approved. Part of the complaint that was made at the time was loss of sight of sun and light from the flats that were Priory Road behind the East Stand. Well, what was the East Stand, unfortunately. Well, they're going to get bigger flats that are bigger and taller in that area than the East Stand was ever planned for. Also, there was talk about the
bus garage.
The bus garage, which was actually shut down quite a long while ago, and they moved to the site next to the previously mentioned Parcel Force site by West Ham Station. And then there was the two track lines that are C2C trains at Upton Park Station to actually utilise those and bring them back into use on a match day purpose. So that would have meant a configuration of the train timetable, but it wasn't outside the realms of possibility to bring those platforms back into usage as a exit only on the match day. So they avoided the ticket hall, and there was basically a bridge going over the line to actually leave you out of the stadium. So it could be done. The East Stand planning permission was in, and that was the whole point of moving the actual pitch over towards the West Stand, or the Rio, whichever people wanted to call it. And there was such a gap at the end of the Boleyn Ground between what was the touchline and the East Stand, was that the redevelopment of the East Stand to bring it back over so it was enclosed, and as we've said as well, to actually have that traditional football stand where you're basically there by the pitch side.
But even those plans would have put up to 45,000
along those lines, yes.
And if you look at,
there was hospitality planned for in the East Stand as well.
So if you look at what we've got now, what the actual match attendances are. And one of the things the club are criticised from whenever minutes come out and reports come out from independent parties is that the club often force how many people are attending on a game. So they'll say, because obviously the taxpayer's responsible for the stewarding, so they'll say, oh, we need to steward for 55, 60,000 people, when actually the attendances are like 45,000. Do you know what I mean? So actually we'd have fitted quite comfortably in that ground when you look at the actual desire to attend games. So
which is well, back in the day at Green Street, and I mean, West Ham has had a bit of a reputation, of course, with the ICF as well. I mean, has that is that different now, also because of the ground? It is more like family, more polished.
I think it's been different for a while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's there's always an element there, but I don't think it's for a long time since Nick Hornby wrote that book and
there's certain
seats came in that kind of element's been lost.
Yeah, there's certain games where there is an edge, and I can think back to Millwall in the League Cup at the Boleyn Ground in what was now basically the final throes of that stadium, and then there's Chelsea in the League Cup from last season at the Olympic Stadium, where there is still an edge, there's still a tension, and there is still some things that take place. There's a little bit of aggravation or pitch invasion, or there's something that takes place where West Ham is. I've trying to put it very generously. There is a bit of a reputation about West Ham. It does stem back from a number of things that have happened in the past, and it's kind of like with maybe Leeds and Cardiff and Millwall also have those kind of reputations. There's a bit of edge at some of these games.
I mean, our reputation is clear when we go to away games because the amount of policing is so heavy-handed, and that's why WISA and works so closely with the FSF, because often at away games we have to speak to the police and say, because we get policed poorly, because everyone assumes West Ham will turn up, therefore it's going to be a riot, and that's not the case. But I think in terms of the trouble at the home stadium, what I think is quite interesting about that is that the misbehaviour inside our home stadium has gone up in the last couple of years since we moved in, because people don't feel at home. Yeah. They feel like they can misbehave because they're away. Whereas at Upton Park, it was very self-policing, because people knew where to go, but also people had been there for a long time. So if you did something stupid, people around you would say, sit down, or and behave yourself. Whereas at this new place, there's all kinds of things sprouting up because people are coming because of part of the brand. And this is kind of where West Ham fell down, I think, in terms of where they tried to brand the club as being a Trotters independent traders version of Arsenal. They should have gone down the St. Pauli route of trying to be a good, solid club. Do you know what I mean? Because I think that would have appealed more than this kind of idea that we're desperately trying to be Arsenal.
Yeah, and that's purely based upon the running of the football club itself rather than anything externally. And you get little silly instances as well, like the Man City FA Cup game where we absolutely got destroyed last season. There was a couple of people wearing superhero costumes just around the pitch and recreated the tackle that led to the penalty, and that kind of thing as well, because people feel they could probably get away with more. Yeah. And now there's obviously massive lines of stewards wearing goggles for their own protection and football boots to run after people running on the pitch. But a lot of people, I feel, it's like, we can get away with something here.
And Amanda will tell you about this. What doesn't help as well with the stewarding being, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when we first turned up, people didn't feel at home. People started to feel let down. They were a long way from the pitch. So people started misbehaving. The transition was handled really badly. So people will often put people that stood up Upton Park ended up being next to people that sat, and that caused a lot of tension. The stewarding becomes so heavy-handed that led to a problem with the stewarding. So now, rather than trying to find a good compromise, the stewarding now is kind of quite tough. So really, like, the stewards aren't particularly helpful. So often, by the time you get to your seat, you've kind of had a bad interchange with a steward, or you've had to stand at security for 20 minutes while they search everyone's bags and stuff like that. So you're already in a bad mood when you get to your seat, and that's what just again leads to the kind of toxic atmosphere.
And in response to that, I've seen that the club have talked about how we want to re-educate the stewards and sit them down and tell them this is what West Ham United Football Club's all about, which is their image of what they believe the club's about, rather than actually a fan perspective. And they want to say, we want to increase the branding of West Ham on the steward. For lack of a better terminology, you can roll a turd in glitter, it's still a turd.
I think that, and then I do think this is important. I think it's a lot of people attracted to West Ham because of the notoriousness of our atmosphere and stuff like that, and people are in that stadium desperately trying to recreate that, aren't they? Like the young people, rightly or wrongly, idolise what West Ham was in the past and come along expecting to experience part of that when the club is not that anymore, and it hasn't really been for a long time.
Yeah. You mentioned before riots in 2009 against Millwall. I want to get your views on this rival of yours. Why is there such a big hate between these two clubs?
I think it started on the docks, didn't it? Didn't it start over a union dispute and the docks?
And the thing is as well, the Thames Ironworks were a shipbuilding yard, and that's the football team that was formed out of the Thames Ironworks was West Ham United ultimately in 1900. Because that team was formed in 1895, while Millwall Docks was more of a commerce, spices, materials, fruit, that kind of thing. So they weren't actually. Southampton and Portsmouth were rival shipbuilding yards, but we were a shipbuilding yard and they were commerce. So I think it wasn't actually a dark. And then there's like folklore about a general strike in the very early 1920s, which apparently the Millwall Docks. They broke the general strike, or there's all sorts of.
Wouldn't stay out, yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't. It's something that nobody can really put an absolute finger on with absolute concrete proof and say that's what it is. And then there was a couple of testimonials at the time where one of the newspaper reports basically said that most of the fans didn't bother watching the game; they just wanted to have a scrap. And the testimonial game got banned, and when the players joined in as well.
But like Freud said, like it's the narcissism of minor difference. Like all these rivalries, and we hate the people that are most like us, and Millwall are like most like us. Like they've never been overly successful. They've got a fiercely loyal fan base, fiercely loyal to the area where the club is from, and where that's a real badge of honour. So it's a nasty rivalry because of that, isn't it? Because of that sense of belonging.
I always explain to people who ask. I say we're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And I'd say they're the cousin we don't like, but at least every once in a while with. When something happens, like when Dylan Tombidis unfortunately passed away, and what's going on with poor little Isla as well, there is actually rivalry doesn't even come into it, and it seems to be actually a concerted effort to help out on both sides. So,
but equally, there's a bloke that goes to my gym and he's massive. He's got Millwall tattles all over him, and I'm generally like. You can feel the tension sometimes, do you know, when we're in the gym, because
you would lose that one.
Yeah, yeah. I'm in big trouble. Do you know what I mean? But it's good. I think it's good. It's not a. And Millwall have been great in the last few weeks with Isla, with young West Ham supporters suffering from cancer, and Millwall fans have gone out their way to raise money for her and stuff like that. So, I mean, there is the romanticism of the rivalry is kind of bigger than it actually is. But I think on its day, do you know what I mean? And if Millwall come up. I don't think the two games against, especially the one in the Olympic Stadium, will be absolutely impossible to police.
Yeah,
absolutely impossible to police.
That's going to be probably a bubble game. They'll probably tell them you can only go via one way. They'll probably coach them in. I don't know how.
But we were discussing. I was discussing this earlier this week. It's quite interesting that they were saying, like I said, the problems around our stadium is going to, like, even if peace was reached today, as soon as West Ham go to Tottenham next year and see what they've got. Compared to we've got, the problems with the stadium will come out again because people are going to leave that ground going, what have we done? What have we done? But equally,
it's kind of like on Bullseye. This is what you could have had.
Yeah. Equally, there's a cultural reference no one in Denmark will get. Equally, the problem you've got in next season, if Millwall do come up, well, people will leave their ground equally gutted, won't they? Because that is a ground that is intense. You're on top. Do you know what I mean? And people are going to think, blimey.
I mean, you guys haven't played them much because you've been in different leagues. How does that rivalry stay alive?
It's notorious, isn't it? It's up there.
It's got a life of its own.
Yeah, it's
and they might get into the playoffs now. I mean, what if they got promoted, and how would that pan out, fan-wise, security-wise? I mean, they also have issues with Chelsea. Do you think the Premier League would be ready for Millwall? No. Not as much as
the authorities will have absolute kittens if they get promoted.
I think a lot of the northern games will. A lot of their main rivals, as you said, Cardiff, Leeds. The rivals outside of London aren't in the Premier League, are they? They'll have Liverpool.
Cardiff maybe get promoted. Maybe there's an automatic.
Wolves and that, but they play them all the time. I mean, the operation at the Den is kind of. it's well rehearsed. So you have to you pick up.
You're like a bunch of cattle getting.
When we played them like a couple of years ago in the Championship, you had to go and pick your ticket up from the ground with photo ID, didn't you? You couldn't they wouldn't send them out, and you had to when you get off the station, you have to go through like a caged walkway into the away end. You can't just
I felt very safe doing that, because that's probably the most safest I've ever felt again, because you're so isolated away, and that's the way they do it.
But at London Stadium, it will just,
because there's so many ways of getting in and out. I think that's why I speculate, if we ever do play them at that particular stadium, I think they will bust them in. As in, I think that's the only way. They'll put them in the coach park, which will be to the south, close to their stand, and they'll basically absolutely surrounded by police and march them in.
Like a bubble game, like when Swansea played Cardiff,
or when Wrexham played Chester most of the time.
But I think the bigger issue they've got is how they stop them getting into the West Ham end, because there's so many tickets available.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah, they'll do the old. We're only going to sell to people with a previous booking history, but then there's still so many tickets floating around.
I know Thomas Cook can go and buy a ticket. You got to pay over the odds, but
a Millwall fan will probably want to do it.
Yeah.
You buy Millwall tickets from Danish agents now.
Well, there you go.
You buy any ticket anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. It's readily available. So I don't know. They can't necessarily do. Everyone has to do photo ID for West Ham fans, like for the home end as well. It would be ridiculous. And just wanted to pick up on saying as well. From before, the question about Mill and how we'd feel to get promoted and that kind of thing, some of the most sensible conversations I have about football are actually with Millwall fans. You get beyond the original, who do you support, West Ham, and then they basically tell you to do one. But it's all in jest, and it's all friendly.
That's Paul's personal opinion. That's not the opinion of Wissa.
No, I'm only speaking for myself here. But some of the most and best conversations I've had about football, and actual real conversations, are with Millwall fans, because at least they understand they're crap, we're crap, and we're all crap together. But most of the Tottenham fans that I've spoken to are absolutely delusional.
Yeah,
as an example.
Here.
But some of the most sensible conversations you can actually have beyond getting beyond the fact that actually you're a West Ham fan and they're Millwall, is actually with a Millwall fan. Only in my opinion.
Yeah.
Last thing, let's look forward. You're playing in the stadium you're playing in. What do you see for the future of West Ham? Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
I think we're a long way into the woods. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a huge amount more that needs to happen. There's a huge amount that the board have to do. Sadly, one of the promises that was made earlier in the year was that there would be a director of football coming in. It appears now in the last 24 hours they're starting to row back from that. Moyes is going to be in charge. I would say now it looks almost certain that his contract will be extended. That is not a universally popular decision amongst West Ham supporters. We've got to go into Tottenham, we've got to go into Chelsea in a couple of years' time. I think there's a lot to be done in terms of making that stadium less of a stadium and more of a home. I think there's a lot of hurdles that have to be jumped for West Ham to recreate what it once was. As an independent supporters association, we're keen to work with the club to make that happen. We've always said we'll be a critical friend, but they don't want to engage really in a meaningful way. David Sullivan's a lot better than Karen Brady in terms of engaging with us. We're completely different, in fact, the different levels of engagement we have. But I hope we can get to a point where we're happy. But a win and a couple of draws seems to have taken the edge off things, but it feels like it's all bubbling under the surface, ready to go at any point.
Yeah, there always seems to be a residual resentment or feelings that when things are going to start turning south and sour, then the major want to protest or to put your point across is going to come back out again. It's always there, and as Mark says, it seems to be diluted by the fact of we've just survived in the Premier League. Well, to me personally, my support of West Ham's never been about what league we're in. It's about actually the team, the stadium we used to have, and everything that came with it, and the historical family ties. So, thinking about that, putting it in the stadium we are at the moment, I don't see anything changing for the foreseeable unless there's some sort of change in terms of the contract that West Ham United have with the London Legacy Development Corporation on the concessionary agreement to be in that stadium for the next 97 years. I don't see anything changing in that, unless something's negotiated where West Ham pay less, West Ham pay more, West Ham pay the same, but T's and C's are sorted. West Ham stop suing the taxpayer all the time, costing them over £3 million as it stands at the moment, as reported by the LLDC to the Greater London Authority. And some people say that the contract that West Ham have for the concessionary at the moment is a great deal for the football club, but it leaves no goodwill for negotiation with the London Legacy Development Corporation. So things like Sky Sports licence is paid for by West Ham United, by the football club. West Ham want to show Sky Sports on the screens in the stadium. The London Legacy Development Corporation say they want to show their advertising on the screens, and the contract that's signed at the moment has no set fast clause that says this is your TV, or you have the right to show for this amount of hours. So West Ham go, right, we're going to sue you then. So where's the good? So where's the goodwill between both sides to actually thrash out a deal to say, look, 2 hours for you, 2 hours for you, mediation, or they sort out themselves and have a good working relationship? Because we're a tenant for the next 97 years, and we're already on a bad footing with the way that the club, and particular people of the club at the moment, have dealt with or signed a concessionary contract to put us into that stadium. So without further negotiations with the authorities and the football club, I don't see the situation at the moment changing, because there's a number of things that can be enforced on the club, like the new style of gating underneath the director's box was put in place. There was one particular fan who had bought his disabled season ticket. He was there, he was happy with his seat, and the club basically said, because we're putting in gates now, because what happened at the Burnley game, you're now moved. So we as an association got in touch with the football club, and we helped that particular gentleman out. He's got a new seat he's happy with. He's got particular assurances from the club it's not going to happen again. So great, we've helped him out. We're more than happy to help him and anyone else out in that kind of circumstance. But that's the kind of thing that's just enforced upon the club by the safety advisory group, and the club basically have to just sit there and go, thank you.
Which is why we want to be on that board.
Yeah, very much so, because the safety certificate is issued, the licensing authority is Newham Council, and Newham Council, as part of that discussion with the police, with LS185, with Expedient, with whoever, have decided this is the measure we're going to enforce, and the club just basically have to take it. So unless there's a major configuration of the contract, a new contract signed, new clauses, new agreements, and both sides actually also agree to come together and work together, and it's actually foster a spirit or a circumstance where they can actually work together, because at the moment they pretty much, West Ham just keeps suing the taxpayer. We're not going to get any change.
And I think, and just on that last point, I think the mistake the fans have made in the last few months, and Wissa and myself have been at the forefront of this, is not to get drawn into the kind of political posturing around the stadium. This deal was done under a Tory mayor. We now got a Labour mayor. In the next 99 years, or however long, it's going to go back and forth at some point. We have to remain above that, and we have to get the best deal for West Ham United Football Club supporters. We can't get sucked into this kind of the political rhetoric that, oh, it's a bad deal for the taxpayer, it's a good deal for the taxpayer. Do you know what I mean? We've got to just concentrate on what's the best thing for West Ham United. That's all we can do, isn't it? And I think the divide and rule mentality that the board have amongst supporters only benefits them. And what we've learned from the last couple of months is we've got to be united.
Not exactly overshining with positivity for the future here, Mark Walker and Paul Turner, but I understand them, because football is love, and love can hurt. And that is it for this podcast. We've got another one coming next week, most likely back in Gurdy Danish, but I will be back with more podcasts in English down the line. As mentioned in the beginning of the program, there is a handful on the website already. www.nordicbet.dk. Press blog and search through the podcasts and look for the UK versions. I'm Tom Carstensen. Thank you for listening.